Thank you.
Good evening, Chuck Sabansky, 4th Ward. Let me just say thank you for addressing the deer problem we have in Ludington. It's gone on too far, and we need to do something. In that, I would like to know sometimes who's responsible for the damage that the deer causes in our yards, the trees, the shrubs, whatever goes on. Also, I'm going to quote from the Daily News. It said, "It would be a civil infraction to place any food on the ground or 5 feet from the ground if it may reasonably be expected to attract animals." My question to the council too is, how are we going to ticket the baiters that bait these deer? From experience, when you have a barking dog and you call the police, they can't give a ticket unless they hear the dog barking. Does that mean an officer can't ticket someone for baiting if they don't see him putting bait on the ground? I think we got something not right here. We got to protect ourselves. We got to protect the violators that are doing damage to our city of Ludington by having the deer. Thanks.
Cheryl Whitehead, 112 North Emily. I'm here again to speak on behalf of the chickens. I like chickens. My friend and I were walking the other day, and we were walking down the lane. There was a pit bully sort of dog came running up against the fence, scared us half to death. And then a German Shepherd-y kind of dog ran up beside it. They started fighting at the fence. We chose to go an entirely opposite direction. I still think, I love dogs, I've had many dogs, but they are much harder to control than chickens. And like my husband said, if I read this properly, then I thank you all for listening to us at the last meeting. I do appreciate it. Thank you, counselors. Thank you, officer.
My name is Terry Grams. I live on Beechwood in Ludington. I'm here in opposition to the deer call. Because the city has never been forthcoming with exactly where this call would be conducted, it's kind of hard to challenge it. I spoke to the DNR today. One of their officers called me, and we discussed some of the points that I thought would be obstacles the city would have to overcome to conduct the call. The first one is the ordinance that prohibits firearms in the cemetery and adjacent property. The DNR officer told me, well, you just write yourself a waiver and go ahead and violate your own law. So I guess that might be another case of yeah, not you, but me. Anyway. The other thing that we talked about is the Natural Resources Environmental Protection Act, which basically says you can't hunt with a firearm or discharge a firearm within 450 feet of a residence without that person's permission. It's amazing, but the DNR says a call isn't hunting. So I guess if they're standing out in the middle of the street, they can fire. They can't come on your property without permission, but they can be 30 or 40 feet from your house and fire a gun if it's a call. You better hope it's not your house that they're doing that. A major obstacle that I'm not sure the council has taken seriously is the deed to the Cartier Park property. The deed is very specific that if that property is used for anything other than park purposes, it'll revert to the Cartier family. And evidently Victory Township takes that very seriously, because there's an article in the paper where they're suing a resident on Hamlin Lake for a boathouse that's maybe on that property. One of the heirs to the Cartier family is my cousin, and I'm pretty sure she'd like to get that property back. So I think that's a significant risk. I've heard it, I've heard the high school force discussed. That's school district property, would be a gun-free zone. But state law, section 4, finance chapter 23 says that the city cannot spend money outside of its boundaries. So, and that property is not within the city at all. On October 6th, the Ludington Daily News had an article about toxicity in Michigan deer. So I've heard people talk about, well, we're going to package this meat up and distribute it. But it sounds like it might be distributing poison. So it might be a good idea not to do that. There could be some liability involved in that. I suggested at one time we might consider some feeding stations in Cartier Park to encourage the deer to stay there. DNR would be against that. They allow it in the Upper Peninsula, never have allowed it in the Lower Peninsula. They say because of chronic wasting disease, which there's never been a case in Mason County and only about 20 in the whole state. And then they talk about bovine tuberculosis, and there's been 7 cases of that in the whole country. So I think those are bogus. We've got to protect the deer by killing them. I don't think that makes sense.
Mr. Graham,
Yeah.
3 minutes has expired. You're more than
Okay.
welcome to use the 2 at the end of the meeting also.
All right, I'm almost done.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address council?
Hi, Council. Justin Hackard. I live on Lavinia. Some of you may know I work at the local Tractor Supply. Number one thing while we get to deal with chickens and sell chickens outside of town is I hear, as I offer to sell those to those people, I don't feel, my customers always say, I feel that I can't have them. I feel if there's something that has happened to where I could move to town to have them, that they are not sure that they could have them. I just would like to, let everyone here know that I hear a lot of outreach from the town. They would love to have them, and I would love to have you guys push that forward. Thank you.
Tom Rada, Dowland Street. Our state government conducts a deer call every year on multiple occasions, making a substantial profit for itself and providing jobs and income for Michigan businesses. A 2019 study found that 700,000 Michigan hunters spent $8.9 billion in revenue statewide through purchasing hunting licenses, gear, firearms, hotel rooms, and food while hunting. Nearly 400,000 deer are harvested each year by the state through its wildlife management programs, and they do not pay those who harvest the deer anything. Holy cow, the volunteer harvesters actually pay the state good money for the opportunity. Ludington is set to make the same mistake that many municipalities have made. Rather than do anything smart, they may choose to go the politically expedient route and do a deer call even when calls are taking place all around them. Consider the DNR now requires hunters to report any deer harvest as early as possible, and they provide that data in real time on a page in their website. I checked this out on Friday evening and saw that 447 deer had been harvested in Mason County so far this year. That's an impressive number at this point, being that the most popular firearm season has not occurred. By this morning, the number had rose to 532, meaning that over the weekend, at least 85 deer had been harvested in our county by bow hunters who are not allowed to use bait piles, unlike the unsportsmanlike USDA snipers you are planning to waste our money on. Deer are nomadic creatures. Ones that are killed in Amber or Hamlin Township are ones that may have wandered into Ludington later on. Thousands of hunters across Mason County will voluntarily harvest thousands of deer in Mason County. all at no cost to taxpayers. In fact, those hunters will help support our businesses or local government, and many will donate their gains to local food banks. Everyone wins if you're not a deer. The state DNR clarifies that deer populations are up precisely because the last 5 winters have been mild and the number of deer hunters have significantly decreased. We can't control the weather, but we can encourage our fellow citizens to take up arms and reduce the surplus deer populations without spending $20,000 per year from the community chest on a chaotic effort. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to address council?
Good evening. I just wanted to say that a year ago.
Excuse me, name and address.
Oh,
please.
I'm sorry. Cheryl Anderson, 905 North St. Catherine. A year ago, my husband and I went and spent $100 on 2 hydrangeas, and they were beautiful and they had blossoms. Oh, we were so excited. The deer ate them. I think it was 2 weeks. They were gone. And our other plants, our mums, and anything else we planted. So I understand. So this year we decided, which you guys are now against, we would set a dish of cracked corn out. See if they'd eat that and leave our bushes and stuff alone. It worked. And we had a beautiful fawn come in, pregnant. She had 2 beautiful little fawns. She literally comes to our window and looks in at my husband like, I'm here. We set the cracked corn out. He shakes the bowl, comes and eats the cracked corn and walks away. Our bushes are not eaten. We don't plant a garden, but I do know of a lot of people that do have gardens and they have fences around them with all the fancies and they don't bother them. I talked to a lady the other day who lives out on Rasmussen Road, and she's lived there quite a long time. And she said, I love watching the deer. I gave up on having a garden. So it's not just in the city. It's all over. Those are God's creatures. And all I see is if every city decided they didn't like deer, they would suddenly become on the endangered species. I don't care what you say. I don't care how many you kill. They're going to become endangered species. They have deer hunting times that you can hunt. That takes care of the access. I've watched that mom raise her 2 fawns. They haven't destroyed anything in our yard. And I don't know that they have destroyed anything on our immediate neighbors' yards because they come to our yard, eat our corn, and go away. I watched her nurse them and raise them. And it just breaks my heart to think that we took away their property for them to be able to be with the things that we've built, that we have changed. So of course they come in where there's trees and there's things to eat. And I think that's only nature. And I just hate the thought of killing them like that. I think we can use our money for something else that's more beneficial, like maybe getting rid of the skunks that keep spraying my dog and has rabies, or possibly the possums and the squirrels. And they have damaged bird feeders of ours, and they're nothing but long-tailed rats. I don't see anything cute about them at all. And when I lived on First Street, they came into my attic and destroyed things up there. So, you know, we do have issues with other animals that are wild. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in let's destroy. And I'm just not in favor of it. Thank you for listening.
Anyone else wishing to address council?
Good evening. My name is Nick Jenner. I live on North Harrison Street. I want to address the chickens in a positive way. I have 3 young children that participate in the 4-H program in the fair every year. And what we are allowed to show is potentially limited based on our children not being able to have chickens within the city limits. I think it is a great benefit to our youth to be able to grow an animal and take care of it, and also get, protein, eggs, whatever you have out of it. I don't know if anybody frequents the fair or not, but it is starting to dwindle in size, especially when it comes to livestock. And I think that is, it might not be the answer. It might not change anything, but could we at least give it a shot and see if some of our youth get more invested in how life works? And that's all I got for you. Thank you.
If there's no one else to speak, I'll close public comment and move on to the approval of the consent agenda, which tonight consists of the approval of the council minutes of the September 26, 2022 regular meeting, approval of bill payment for the period commencing September 26, 2022, and the adoption of this agenda as presented. Do I have a motion to approve this consent agenda as presented?
So moved, Your Honor.
Second. Motion by Counselor Johnson, seconded by Counselor May to approve the consent agenda as presented. Do we have any questions or additions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This motion is carried. Before we dive into the first agenda item, Interim Chief Wojciechowski, am I close there? Close enough, sorry. Would you introduce these two young officers for us? We have a number of new officers that serve the city. An opportunity to introduce them to council.
The city manager asked that I bring some of the newer guys down to meet the council. Hold on. These two unfortunate ones happen to be Jared Versluis, who's came to us from Grand Rapids area, and Connor Gallagher, he's from Battle Creek area. Yeah. I've been with us about 2 years almost. Yeah, almost. A little over 2 on Jared as well. I'm more actually. So you're here.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, so as the chief pointed out, this was my request. So you'll see other officers as we hire on new officers. We will try to make this a habit. It's a little bit tougher with them because of the shifts they work. I will be also asking our new public works employees, anytime we get a new employee, we will be bringing them before you all at a reasonably close meeting. 2 years is not reasonably close. So we will be speeding that up significantly. So just wanted to keep in the loop.
We should make them give speeches.
I you know what? I'm sure some of our public works employees love giving speeches. So I will definitely have that conversation.
Struggling to get officers now, Counselor. Council, the first item on our agenda tonight is the presentation of Ordinance 494-22, a 3-year cooperative services agreement between the City of Ludington and the United States Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wild Services. This is to approve a deer call within the city limits. Council, a months-long impassioned citizens debate has been raised concerning this issue. Concerned that a simple voice vote has the real possibility of not being sufficient to render a conclusive decision, I'll be seeking a voice vote should the process reach that requirement. Correct. A roll call. Thank you. Councilor May, as this issue has been discussed and presented at numerous Public Safety, Public Utilities Committee meetings, I ask you, as chair of that committee, to bring this motion forward, seeking a second and any subsequent decision amongst council prior to asking for a vote. Councilor?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Your Honor. You're correct on how much public comment, public input's been heard over this matter, especially in the last couple of sessions, some matters of legality, of legal liability, of strategy, you might say, have all come up. So just to provide much more of a definitive explanation of the entire program and what's hopefully going to happen, I now turn the mic over to Mr. Foster and our city attorney.
Thank you, Councilor May. If there are questions of council, that's probably the easiest way. I know in watching the video, it's also just as an FYI, if you miss a meeting and you have to watch it online, it's much more difficult to watch it when you're not there and be able to help. So I apologize for my missing last meeting. But if there are questions with regards to the program as presented or proposed from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, if there are questions on some things that we've received from members of the public, or if there's just something in the back of your mind that you're thinking about, both Attorney Hammersley and myself have been digging into some of these questions. I've had a number of conversations with both the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and happy to answer any questions. Just as a brief review over the program, for the $19,500 a year that the program would cost, essentially the U.S. Department of Agriculture would come in to 3-4 sites potentially as we work with them in that program. They would bait for a couple of weeks leading up to essentially the new year. As soon as the new year turned over, they would go out on their first evening. Depending upon the number of deer they removed, they would then either go out a second night a few days later, or that we would have to have a conversation with the DNR. It is 4 nights that the city would receive from the U.S. Department of Agriculture worth of effort. It is effort-based. It is not deer number-based. So if they cull or shoot 35 deer night 1 at a couple of different sites, they would go back. We'd have a conversation with the DNR if they believe that they could still remove more. The DNR would then review the situation and make a recommendation or adjust the permit as said. And again, that would keep going, or we would stop after night 3 based on the DNR saying, no, we're comfortable with the number that you've called. And then we would work with them on the site for the field dressing that the U.S. Department of Agriculture would do. And then we would work on transportation to Sanders Meats, who has at this point agreed to process the meat. We would work with the Michigan Sportsmen Against Hunger, who would pay for the processing of the meat, and then that meat would be donated to the Lakeshore Food Club. Beyond that, I'm happy to answer any questions that there would be on the program or any of the other conversations that have occurred.
Could I ask you right off the bat, what are the locations we're planning on conducting it? And have you examined all the legal issues and resulting from such?
So as of right now, when we had the initial couple conversations, or I had the initial couple conversations and meetings with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the DNR, the three sites or areas that we were looking at primarily were the areas around Cartier Park, the areas in the school forest, and then the areas around the railroad tracks off of First Street. As a part of the requirement, you'll see in your packet that there's a form, it's 12A or something along those lines, that is a requirement for any property that would not be city owned. It's on page 34. If there's anything that's property that's not city owned, we would have to get that property owner to sign off on that. The school district, I've had initial conversations with their, I believe it's a building and grounds committee, and they initially didn't have any concerns. The superintendent would like some insurance items provided to them from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which I've done. But their recommendation to their school board would be based on your decision tonight, obviously. We have not had initial discussions with the railroad because that's just going through a bureaucracy that gets kind of difficult. And so we didn't want to get it started too early. But that would be the next one as well.
Thank you.
I have several questions, Your Honor. The first one, getting back to what you said about they may take 35 deer. What if they only take 10? Are we still obligated to that 19.5?
Correct. So it's effort based. It's not deer based. So, and that in your packet, we have the materials from Manistee. And that was part of their concern was, I think it was year 2 of their program. I can't remember for certain. It was in the packet. The number they called were right around 15 to 17. And in the proposal for year 3 took the cost up to $15,000 for Manistee. So it was about $1,000 a deer that they were potentially going to see. and they didn't see value in doing that. Year one, they saw value because it was at $10,000. They had a larger number of deer removed. But once they got to that year three, they had some concerns, and that's why they didn't proceed into 2021.
Okay, my next question, it's in Article 3,
Mhm.
mutual responsibilities. Says there will be no equipment with a procurement price of $5,000 or more per unit purchased directly with funds from the cooperator for use on this project. All other equipment purchased for the program is and will remain the property of Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. What exactly does that mean?
It's essentially saying that if they had to purchase anything for the program that was special or different, that
Like
they would be like,
guns?
yeah, if they had to purchase anything that was extra beyond what they already have, that there would be a topic of conversation, but it would be included in the 19.5. But it would all remain their property. So the amount that we would be paying them, it would go towards something extra potentially, but that would be part of that discussion. This is boilerplate language from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I don't think it was touched on last meeting. When you work with a state or a federal agency, these documents have been approved by the Attorney General's office. And so to change these documents takes a long time. And so that's why some of this language may seem odd and boilerplate. It was probably from a circumstance where a community had a unique situation, or an airport or a state forest or a state park had a unique situation where they were required to purchase something that was then built into the contract price. But the USDA had to make sure that it was still their property, and that because whomever purchased that with their contract didn't think that was then their property. Yeah. So if all of a sudden our contract went to $23,000 because they had to buy a $4,000 piece of equipment, they're making sure that we understand that it's not now our $4,000 piece of equipment. It's still the U.S. Department of Agriculture's, even though we would pay for it.
Okay.
Yep.
The last thing, Article 10 liability. This company, APHIS WS, assumes no liability for any actions or activities conducted under this agreement, except to the extent that recourse or remedies are provided by Congress under the Federal Tort Claims Act. To me, it's not clear on the liability of this thing that they may provide for us.
I don't know if Ross wants to touch on that real briefly.
I mean, the only thing I would say is that because APHIS is part of that federal agency, this is essentially partly a statement of their governmental immunity with respect to certain claims, but they're not going to allow the city essentially to sue them based on their actions or activities conducted under the agreement. We could sue probably for a breach or something like that, but not their actions or activities.
But if someone is hurt by a stray bullet or something, the city is liable for that?
Under the tort, and that's under, if you look farther in your packet, there's comments from Michigan Municipal Michigan, our risk management consultant or our insurance carrier, that essentially says, yes, there's option under the federal tort law to go back at the federal government. They're very specific in nature. But in the end, it's your decision. It's a business decision that the city has to make. There are options under the federal tort law to recoup those issues and to cover liability. But it's, they are a self-insured agency, and they cover themselves with governmental immunity as a sovereign. So there's limited options for that.
I mean, I think that ultimately there's an element of trust in this, and that this is a federal agency. They've got highly trained, staff that they're using for this. All of the DNR program materials and APHIS materials will attest to the training that those folks go to. So to the extent that you're comparing this as a business decision between, Joe Smith and his deer culling operation versus the federal government, that's, they're making the affirmative case that we're highly trained, and we can handle it, but then they also obviously have their own protection built into the contract, and it's not something that we can negotiate with them on, unfortunately.
Along that lines, the people actually doing the call, this is they're professionals. This is what they do for a living.
That was one of the questions that I asked of the USDA, because for someone A, who does not hunt, and B, who has never participated in a call before, my question, my assumption was, is that these are folks that work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that as a part of their job, they go out and do these duties. No, these folk, this is all they do. They are sharpshooters for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services who go out and do this everywhere, all across the state of Michigan. They go into state forests, national forests. A lot of airports is really their big job across the state, but this is all they do. They are tested quarterly to make sure that they keep up. They train regularly, so this is all they do.
Do we know if, when they're doing airports, do they just do it 4 nights a year, or is that something that's kind of an around-the-clock obligation?
They would be brought in on special projects, so they don't have an ongoing contract with, say, Cherry Capital Airport. They would be brought in specifically at a specific time of the year to deal with whatever problem that was, whether that was a deer removal problem or some sort of other wildlife. They would be brought in at those times.
I also have a quick question. Mr. Grams pointed out that there was a potential issue with the Cartier Park deed. Can you kind of touch base a little bit on that deed and whether or not this fits into the parameters of us using that space?
I'll let Ross touch on it in a second here, but from my perspective, the use of a park is very general in nature, and the culling of deer from a park would be more or less maintenance of that park. It wouldn't be a new use. It'd be an activity under the use of a park.
I'd concur, and I'd just say that, the deed restriction relates to the, underlying use of the property. That does not change with this. We're not converting this to a hunting extravaganza, like, people are fenced in or anything like that. I mean, the underlying land use of a park remains for a temporary period. It's going to be used, or prospectively would potentially be used to assist in this deer call. But again, these are, wild animals that also exist in the park. And so there's not, I can't rule out somebody filing some sort of claim, but I don't expect that kind of claim would be successful based on the program parameters and the underlying use of the park. I don't think this would revert.
So is there any scientific literature that would support the deer call are effective in reducing the population?
Could you please discuss the apparent conflict with the city ordinance about discharging a weapon inside city limits?
So the specific question that was brought up was, I believe, with regards to cemeteries and the proximity to the cemetery itself and within direct adjacency to it. The U.S. Department of Agriculture are essentially sworn officers of the federal government, making them law enforcement officials, which is an allowed officer, I guess, phraseology, an allowed person to discharge a weapon within that proximity to the cemetery.
I have a couple of questions too, Mr. Foster. We had the ARPA meeting, the public meeting here.
Yep.
Were funds for a deer call put on that list?
Yes, they were.
Okay. I remember that there were a few people there that expressed concerns about deer at that meeting, and I just didn't know if that had made the list or not.
It didn't make the final list. I'm looking at it right now. The final list kind of had 10 votes or higher were the ones that were automatically funded. This had 5 votes, but was brought back by Councilor May and others for inclusion. But it was included in that initial kind of project list.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm looking at ways that we might be able to, if we decided to do a deer call, that we could check for statistics to see how it may be effective or not. So I did talk to Officer W. I'm a W too, so, and asked him to look up possible deer car collisions in the last few years and ask if he could continue to do that for data in the next couple of years if the deer call went to a yes, and he said they could do that. I'm wondering, when I was reading through this information from both Manistee and the ordinance, the Ag Department will come in and they will set up baiting areas, they will also set up deer cams.
Yep.
So could we get statistics from them on how many deer they notice before anything happens?
And that's how they will determine where they spend their time. So if we identify, say, again, these 3 locations or general locations, they will set up baiting stations, again, non-hunter, baiting stations in these locations, and we'll set up trail cams at each of them. And then as the lead up to the potential first night of this removal program, the way that it would work is they would review all of that tape to make sure that they're getting a consistent flow of deer into those areas, and it would be based on the number. So they won't go into an area that has only seen 1 deer go up to that bait pile or that bait station over a 2-week period or a week period. They'll go into a different location. But what we can do and what the DNR will ask us to do is to track that. So if we know that, it went through 3 nights, we removed 60 deer over 3 nights, the DNR approved up to 70. The USDA went to ask for 75. The DNR said that's too much. They'll allow us, the USDA will work with us to keep those trail cams up so we can actually see the next night or the following nights to see how many deer are we still seeing at these locations. So we can track that, and the DNR would actually prefer that we track that and have other measures as we go through this process.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Is this just question and answer time, or are we just open for discussion at this moment? Like, I know there's no motion on the table yet.
It's
so we'll
mostly
wait.
clarification,
Okay.
if you would.
Okay.
Any further questions, council? I have a couple, if you don't mind. Can you tell me again how the number is determined? Is that determined by the city, how many we would like to see removed, or is that determined by the USDA or the DNR?
So when I had the conversation with Vernon Richardson from the DNR, he asked us what number of deer to remove. This was post-conversation with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In hearing that the Manistee was at 40, Lansing, they said 40, and that's kind of been the starting point for a lot of these communities. That's what I said. There was no concern. There was no hesitation. He said, yep, that's fine. No big deal. I think when you get into the conversation is I'm sure the statistics that have already been brought up about the number of deer that have already been hunted so far this year. I'm sure as we get into those conversations about expanding the program, if you get after night 1 and you've taken 30, the DNR might look at some of these other statistics from hunting periods to say, you know what, this is how many that have already been removed. Maybe we won't expand it beyond 50 or 55. It's totally up to the DNR. The USDA could make a recommendation, but the DNR makes the final call.
So they will take a look after each night and determine what the proper amount to take out.
Correct. Again, we might, frankly, the USDA might go out there and remove 5 deer on that first night of effort. And they go back out for 3 more nights over a period of time and they remove 5 more. That could happen too. But the initial permit will be for 40 deer.
And who, does the city have any approval or disapproval of the action after that? It doesn't come back to council, say, hey, we've taken 35, council, we'd like your approval to take.
No, from my standpoint, if council agrees to do this, then you're giving me permission to work with the USDA and the DNR and their experts to say these are the numbers.
The last thing I had was city liability. We had talked about the USDA liability and their federal umbrella. Does the city hold any liability here?
That's a question that our insurance carrier could not answer fully for us. There's always liability for us, no matter what activity. Even if our our contractor is the federal government, there is always a concern or potential for liability because someone could always throw it out there. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is very clear on how they do it, what they do, when they do it. If there is any potential for any sort of injury or damage to personal or property, they will stop immediately. They don't go through with it. In talking with the folks here out of the Michigan locations, they've had 0 to maybe 1 actual incident where they had a real issue. Every other time that they've encountered one, they have stopped. They do this for a living. They make sure that they do it in a safe manner because of that responsibility that they hold.
In all of the investigations, have you heard of any unsafe practice?
No, not when you, again, when you contract with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, it's one thing. I believe there's a private company out of Detroit that was hired for a few years for some folks that is no longer being hired for some of those similar concerns.
Do you know of any municipalities where this has been a complete and total success?
I believe you, I think the complete and total success is arbitrary to an extent. But Lansing, I'll say Lansing continues to put money into it. Whether that is for a successful reason, a political reason, or some other reason, they continue to put money into it. So that Manistee made the conscious decision on a financial standpoint that makes sense. Lansing continues to do it. Other communities are getting into it, again, for whatever reasons there may be.
Any other questions for the city manager or city attorney? Councilor May, floor is still yours.
Thank you, Your Honor. Therefore, if we're done with this, I think we could have further discussion after I make the motion, correct? So at this point, I will make the motion that we adopt ordinance number 494-22, 3-year cooperative services agreement with the Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wildlife Services for a 3-year deer removal.
Motion by Councilor May, seconded by Councilor Terzano to adopt ordinance 494-22, a 3-year cooperative services agreement between the City of Ludington and the United States Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wildlife Services to approve a deer call within the city limits as presented. Council, we have any further questions, comments?
I just want to make a couple comments, if I may. We've discussed this quite a bit already, but you know, those of us that are hunters understand that we can see deer all day long on trail cameras. And if you hunt in the UP at your bait piles, but come November 15th, when it's legal to hunt them, they're likely not to show up right away. And I'm nervous that that's going to happen in our community. So what if only a few deer come into range, or worse yet, none? And then we're back at square zero wondering about what to do with deer in the city. These ARPA funds are considered granted monies, although no cost to us today, there's still a cost to us tomorrow. And the money is coming from somewhere, and it's eventually going to have to be found again from somewhere, whether it's federal, state, or local tax dollars to do it. And we all learned in high school economics that there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I believe that holds very true to this situation today. We budgeted at that ARPA funds meeting $50,000. And I say that we budgeted, but we really didn't budget because we didn't think that this was something that we were going to go through with. And currently we're spending $19,500 a year, which adds to $58,500. And that means that we are taking $58,500 away from some other project that is a for sure thing. And I know that you and I work very hard for our monies and our tax dollars. And I think that we should be very frugal with how we spend this not free money. A couple of other things that we need to think about is when one thing doesn't work, we just go back to the drawing board and try something else. But why are we trying something that we know for sure isn't going to work? I mean, it could, but we're not 100% sure that it's going to work. So the next item on our agenda, which I'm not stepping forward in looking at that, is about baiting animals. So isn't that something or a choice that we could do to disallow baiting animals in the city, or not allow it as an option of something that we can all try and do that's actually free? I'm going back to these survey results and representing the Fourth Ward. It's very important to me. And these surveys that we have received collected in the Fourth Ward, there was 38 total people that were surveyed, only 13% that didn't like deer in the community. And those 38 people took time to fill out a survey and voice their concerns. And if you notice, that 83-person petition was filled out that's in your packet by people from a particular area. Just today, about a minute before our meeting started, young lady Diana James, thank you, presented me with this petition, which I will pass down to the city clerk to go into record. And I just wanted to read it for you today. Ludington City Councilors are voting on an act that will hire a company to come into Ludington and slaughter all the deer here in town and pay this company thousands and thousands of dollars. We believe this is cruel and inhumane. We vote no on this barbaric act. We believe that a better alternative can be explored before carrying out this gruesome act. And I personally didn't count the signatures. I believe when she put this on the front, she mentioned that there was 80 some. I don't recall the total that she had given me, but there's people here that don't want it and there's people here that do. And I think we need to just make a really educated decision about how we spend your money and how we spend our money. And we should probably we shouldn't think about this as a do nothing approach. And I've heard that time and time again. Well, I'd rather do something than do nothing. But instead, we should just look at it as, well, this might not work. So let's go back to the drawing board and think of something that is going to work. And I will just pass this down if I could, or I can leave it here and give it later to the city clerk.
I guess I would just like to say, again, going back to the liability issue, that it's just not clear enough for me to agree to do this, knowing that we could be liable for something, if somebody got hurt. And like Sherry, the cost is huge. I would rather see us use our money some other way and come up with some other suggestion on what to do with our deer problem.
If I may. Culling wild animals is an international practice that is used by countries around the world. Africa probably has one of the most innovative culling programs. They cull elephants, they cull hippos, they cull rhinos. That's how they control their population. It is a known, proven way to protect not only the habitat that these animals live in, it's a way to protect the animals themselves and the people living in those communities. We have a problem here in this city. And the problem in this city is that we have a deer population. And unlike what that petition says, they're not coming in here to kill all the deer in the city. That's not what the program is. The program is to deal with the overpopulation that we have here in this city. And that's part of the problem. Culling in and of itself is not necessarily going to solve the problem. You got to take a look at this, in a holistic way. And that's why adding to the ordinances, this whole notion about feeding wild animals and setting up bait stations, that's all part of the process. At the last council meeting, I read what the DNR said about Mason County and the deer management unit here. And DNR themselves has said that you have to do antlerless deer hunting, period, end of discussion. The University of Michigan has a Dearborn campus, which is a 300-acre campus. They have what they call this study area, an environmental study area. And it's one of these extraordinary pieces of property in the middle of Dearborn, where they have 300 acres and they are able to replicate what the state has looked at. People and students and faculty have gone there for years and studied it. They just issued their report, and I'm just going to read a couple things from it. Deer browse on young tree saplings and prevent the replacement of native trees when they die. Through excessive browsing, primarily on native plants, deer also promote the spread of invasive species. After the 2 previous culls, the staff there at the University of Michigan observed a resurgence of native plant life, including the seedlings and saplings of native trees, which are critical to the healthy forest generation and support a host of native birds and other wildlife. Native spring wildflowers, which were being over-browsed by deer and on the verge of being wiped out in this area, have rebounded. To continue this trend, it is necessary to maintain sustainable ESA deer population in the short and long term. There's been a dramatic increase in, the question was asked, what has changed since the first deer call? There's been a dramatic increase in native plant abundance and diversity within the area, including Native American basswood, American elm, bur oak, northern red oak, and other tree seedlings. Numerous plants and wildflowers have also come back from near extinction, and the campus community garden programs have also been sustained since the first call. How many more times will a deer call need to be repeated? The best way to control deer population are natural predators and hunting. That's it. You either cull them or you allow the natural predators to do it. So future culls are expected. The university has researched alternatives to a cull, such as installing additional fencing, which is cost prohibitive, contraceptive sterilization, which has demonstrated poor success with actually lowering the deer population, and tranquilizing and relocating deer, which is not permitted in the state of Michigan. So that's why they do a cull. Also, the Huron-Clinton Metropolitan Authority, which has responsibility down in lower state for the Metro Park, oversees and manages more than 25,000 acres throughout the park system. So these are all the parks in and around the Detroit area. In their study, their whole report, just a couple things from their report. Because deer can consume up to 12 pounds of vegetation a day, they can influence the composition of the fauna and flora communities and ecological systems, putting some species and ecological systems at risk. In general, a population density of between 15 to 20 deer per square mile is the preferred carrying capacity for habitats within the metro parks. And that aligns with the population density threshold as recommended by Michigan DNR. Research continues to support culling has the most effective, humane way to protect the health and welfare of the metro parks deer population, as well as the ecosystem which sustains them. And finally, since the inception of the deer management program, several uncommon plant species are once again being observed in the parks, and in many instances, overall ecosystem health is improving. Moderate to good increases have been noticed in indicator species like trillium and geranium, along with white cedar, cherry, and oak. Culling works. Do we have a guarantee that culling's going to work here? No. No. Do we have a guarantee that the folks doing Washington Street, that they're going to do everything perfectly and we might not have a liability issue? No, we don't have that guarantee. But the reality is we have a problem here in this city and we got to address that problem. They talk about 10 to 12 deer per square mile. Ludington is what, 3.5 square miles?
A little over that.
A little bit over that. There's a house on Ferry Street, and right behind that house, between Ferry and Park, there's 12 deer living there. It started at 6 at the beginning of the year, but 3 more were born. It's a problem. City manager mentioned East Lansing. Ann Arbor is bringing it, it's back before the Ann Arbor City Council. They had done it for a number of years. Then they stopped doing it, and then the problem arises. We have to do something, and at least my research tells me that culling is the best way to deal with it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Sure. I'd just like to say a few things. This has been a really controversial issue, as we seem to have a lot of those lately. But this is one that really pulls at the heartstrings of lots of people, either one way or the other. The deer are beautiful creatures. They do not harm humans much at all. We do have some car crashes, and the main objection seems to be that they do interfere with our gardens and our plants. And that's a big issue there. If we did nothing, what would happen to the deer population in 5 years? Well, we don't know. I talked to a forester from the Mason County Conservation District, and he said the carrying capacity for deer, ideally, as Councilor Trezano said, is about 12 to 15 per square mile. He said the carrying capacity, when you get to 40 to 50 deer per square mile, they will start starving and have problems. He says you don't want to get to that point at all, but we're a long ways away from the carrying capacity. He also said something interesting. He said, ecologically, the deer have places to go to find food, but we offer them candy in the city. So it's much easier for them to come into the city and eat the hostas and other things instead of having to stay in the forest to look for native plants and seedlings and things. So they'll come to where it's easy. He explained it really well to me. He said, if you have a house with 2 kitchens, and in one kitchen you're making whole wheat bread and Brussels sprouts, salads and things, and in the other kitchen you're making ice cream and candy and cookies, and you have a 3-year-old that lives in that house, and he has a choice of going to whichever kitchen he wants to eat. He's probably going to take the sweet kitchen. Well, that's what we're doing with deer today too. And he said, what we really need to do is we need to take that candy away from the deer, and they will leave the city. But we've got a lot of people who are feeding the deer candy right now. So I was thinking, and I broached him with this, if we did an experiment and we did the deer call, because it was brought up with the ARPA funds, people came with concerns with that. I'd like to honor the people that come forward with concerns, like you guys here tonight too. That was brought up. We did allot some money for that, so it is allotted on that. If we did an experiment for 3 years with a call, and I would like statistics like car crash amounts, statistics from the deer cams that the agricultural department puts up. What did we start with? What would we end with? And see if it is beneficial to our city. But in the meantime, also educate people about what are better plants to plant, what are ways you can deter them by sprays, by nets, by fences, so people have some education also. I am not in favor of killing the deer, but I would be in favor of looking at this experiment if we could get that data to look at. Now, I understand too, we don't have to do this for 3 years. If we find out, like Manistee, after 2 years that is just not working financially or whatever, we can pull the contract. And I think that's right, Mr. Foster, right? So I'm looking at, would it be worth doing an experiment to check this out and see if it would have some effect? But if we don't educate people, those 2 kitchens, those deer are going to keep coming. If Hamlin Township and PM Township are not doing calls, those deers will just come into our kitchen to still eat that candy. So I think it's a 2-pronged approach on that. So that's kind of my thought on it at this point.
Anyone else wish to address?
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to bring up one topic that hasn't been brought up tonight, which is, again, we live in the most tick infested area in the state of Michigan, and these deer are the largest conveyors of ticks there are. You don't have ticks in your backyard or in your house or in your couch because there aren't any ticks. These deer are going to bring them in. If you have dogs, pets, little children, grandkids, you're playing a rough game with them. And no deer has a right to do that. As far as the trying to change plants, I don't grow plants because they don't attract deer. I grow plants because they're attractive and they make my property look better. Deer do not pay my taxes. I could care less what is attractive to a deer because it shouldn't be in the city. It's a wild animal. And as far as the liability issue, if the city didn't entertain different departments that might possibly cause harm to someone, we wouldn't have a police department, we wouldn't have a fire department, we wouldn't do anything. The likelihood that something's going to happen from these fellas shooting these deer is infinitesimal, and it is certainly no reason not to have this call. There is absolutely no evidence that it's ever been a problem before. Those two officers that came in here, God bless them, are not a third as well trained as these guys that are going to conduct this call, and have been doing it every day or throughout the years. So to me, and as John said, health-wise, any DNR person will tell you, deer call is good for deer. You're going to end up with healthy deer, less deer, but healthy deer, rather than deer that starve and become disease-ridden, maybe transferring other things that we don't want around here. There's nothing else you can do. It's no fun. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to kill a bunch of deer necessarily, but it's something we have to do because it makes the most sense. And again, to let a wild animal that doesn't belong here dictate to the city what the city can do is, to me, it's hard to comprehend. So that's it. Thanks.
This is the second time I've heard Councilor May give that speech, and it gets more inspiring each time. I will confess to still being undecided at this point. I'm glad that Councilor Tizano gave some scientific argument, because up until now, I haven't really seen anything that says it's effective. Municipalities have tried it and quit. And so I'm not so sure that we'd have any more success than Manistee. I'm just torn. I'm not convinced yet that that's a best use of funds at this point.
My turn. I am in favor of the deer call. I believe we do have a problem here in Ludington, and I believe the deer call will be part of that solution. I know, as you said, we don't know whether it will work or not, but unless we try, we will not know. But we do know we do have a problem here. And I believe we should do this holistically, as you said, not only with the deer call, but educating the residents to not feeding them and identify the trees and the shrubs that attract deer, so that if you are doing landscaping, you do not get those plants. So yes, I am in favor of the deer call.
Having heard from all the counselors, city attorney, city manager, a couple things I'd like to say if I could. I don't think anybody can find a definitive solution to this problem. There is no end game. It will continue as long as deer continue to populate. And I've yet, in discussions with citizens for the last couple of months, find anybody who will try to tell me there are fewer deer here this year than there were 5 years ago. So what that tells me is the deer population is continuing to grow, and there's no reason to believe that it will not continue to grow. But I think that the city is prepared, however this solution goes forward, or whatever solution comes forward here, to dedicate a public education. And it's something people have talked about all along. Changing your plants is something else, being more proactive with sprays and fencing. There are more items also. Those are just three I wrote down here. But somehow the brakes have to be put onto this. And statistically, I have yet to see where the population will anytime soon start becoming a smaller problem in this town, only becoming a greater problem or continuing the problem we have today. Any last words, council?
I do, if I may. I meant to say this before, and Councilor Winchesky touched on it. One of the things that has been, I find most gratifying, especially over the last couple months, is what I see as an increased citizen participation in the direction of this city. Longtime people that come to council meetings know that there's usually just a handful of people here. But when I get calls after 9 o'clock on a Sunday night on an issue that's going to be up on before the council the next day, as I told the person who called me, I said, regardless of how this goes, I appreciate you being involved. I appreciate you taking the time to let myself and other council members know your concerns, know where you're coming from. And to me, that's what a community is about. It's about citizens. It's just not coming to the council meetings. As Mayor Miller has often said, you can come here and give your remarks for your 2 or 3 minutes, but reaching out to council members individually, that's really where it's at. You know, it's getting in touch with us, stopping us on the street or whatever, and or writing letters to us or whatever. And I really appreciate that, regardless of which side of an issue you are on. So I welcome that. I welcome the healthy debate. And we got more stuff coming down the pike that'll be like this. And thank you for doing that.
I'll restate the motion. Brought forward by Councilor May, seconded by Councilor Terzano, to adopt ordinance 494-22, a 3-year cooperative services agreement between the City of Ludington and the United States Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wildlife Services, to approve a deer call within the city limits as has been presented. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Counselor Johnson,
No.
Counselor Truzano,
Aye.
Counselor Bolger,
No.
Counselor Kane,
Aye.
Counselor Winchesky,
Yes.
Counselor May,
Yes.
Counselor Stibbits,
No.
3 noes, 4 ayes.
This motion is carried. We'll ask city manager to proceed and keep us updated on the progress. And to echo, if I can, Councilor Terzano, whether it was this issue or the next 5, 6, 7 that are coming up, I fully appreciate the citizens' advocation for what they think is best, whether or not we all are in agreement or all in disagreement. I think one thing we can agree upon, but this is the way it needs to be done. And the closeness of this vote kind of demonstrates how democracy works. We may not be happy with the outcome, and there's advocacy still left to do. But I appreciate, as Councilor Terzano brought forward, the attendance and the participation of everyone for these issues. Thank you very much. Next, we have committee and staff reports, and we'll hear first from Finance and Personnel Committee. Councilor Johnson?
I have no report and no action items tonight.
Public Safety, Public Utilities, Counselor May.
Thank you, Your Honor. Again, I'm going to make a move to adopt ordinance number 4, make a motion to adopt ordinance number 487-22, which is an amendment to the previously existing animal nuisance ordinance. We would have voted on this last week, or last meeting, but it was tabled until now to include an addition to designate that one of the things that are allowed is the development and use of compost piles. That was added in section 3499, letter G. Other than that, it's the same ordinance as we have looked at for the last 2 meetings. So again, I make a motion that we adopt ordinance number 487-22, an amendment to the animal nuisance ordinance.
Support.
Motion by Counselor May, seconded by Counselor Balger to adopt ordinance 487-22, an amendment to the animal nuisance ordinance as presented. Council, the floor is open for questions and comments.
I do have a question, and it's regarding section 34-99 subsection G. And it's about feeding deer and other wildlife. And then it says section B, I found on page, I think 63. It says naturally growing materials from fruit trees, shrubs, crops, flowers, grains, seeds, or gardens producing fruit or vegetables for household consumptions. How are we reading that? Like, you can have those things, and if a deer or a chicken or a dog or whatever happens to eat them, is that a problem, or is that something that's accepted?
Those are
Accepted things.
correct. Those are items that you're allowed to have.
Okay.
So we are not preventing somebody from growing a garden in their backyard.
Right. Okay. I just wanted clarification.
I have one question too. If someone's throwing bird or bread
Mhm.
off their back deck for the birds,
Yep.
is that going to be an issue?
Under this ordinance, that would be prohibited. What I will say to that is, unless it is done by complaint, I'll look to interim chief as well. Unless we receive a complaint, whether it's the police department, city hall, that is a tough one to say, we're going to catch everyone out there throwing bird feed or, suet or whatever it may be in their backyard, or even day-old bread from Jimmy John's. We're not going to catch all that. It's primarily going to be the folks that are doing it on a regular basis and attracting wild animals that we would catch. Am I correct?
Ideally, it would be knocked out, just a verbal talk at the door with them to try to get them to stop that way.
Mhm.
Document it. And then if another call comes up and there's evidence of it, then take it follow.
Can I ask kind of a clarifying question about that? So is this something where you have to physically see the person putting bread outside for animals, or is it something based solely off of a complaint?
Well, we come there on a complaint, ideally. We weren't going to go proactively looking for bait piles, but unlike the barking dog, the bait pile sitting in somebody's yard would be self-evident.
Mhm.
So that would probably be grounds to look deeper into it and find out who put it there, and then either have them clean it up or charge them appropriately.
Okay.
I have a couple of concerns with the ordinance too that I would like us to look at here too. So under part F, it says feeding of birds and other wildlife in city parks, marinas, and beaches, but we don't have a definition here for wildlife. We have some definitions of other terms in the front of this ordinance, but we don't have one for wildlife. And I think that would deserve some kind of a definition on that too, so we know exactly what we're talking about on that. On section G, feeding deer and other wildlife, again, there's the wildlife. No person may place or permit placement on the ground or within 5 feet of the ground surface within the city of any fruit, berries, grain, vegetables, nuts, salt, or other eligible material or bait, which may be considered to be expected to attract deer, wild turkeys, or other wild animals. So again, what are wild animals? First of all, there's two things on there that I'm questioning. 5 feet above the ground, if you have to put a bird feeder that high to reach where you're going to hook the bird feeder, might be difficult for some of us that are a little bit shorter. That seems hard. And then what's the definition of wild animals? I mean, a lot of squirrels eat out of my bird feeder. So is a squirrel, a wild animal that we can't feed to? So just looking at where do squirrels fit in, pigeons fit in, those kind of things too. So I would like to recommend that. And then we have the TNR program that has been a great help to the city of Ludington controlling the cat population. In here too, I think we need to clarify that hopefully that we feel that TNR program is very valuable and that cat feeding that goes along with that program may be acceptable in this ordinance. And right now, I don't think it addresses that as clearly as we might want that to happen. So I would suggest, I'd like to ask if you'd be willing to send this back to committee for some more clarification on some of the language here and some of the definitions. But also, I understand that we need to retain the no chicken ordinance right now. And remember, we talked about in the future going back to look at that to see if we wanted to look at chickens. But for right now, we need to put that in. So any discussion or support for going back to committee or not?
I'll support that.
I would support that also.
Are you, rather than taking a straw poll here,
Oh.
are you willing to put forward a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion to recommend that this ordinance go back to the Public Safety and Utilities Committee for clarification and adjustments.
I'll support
Oh, I guess I should leave in the chicken. We're leaving in the chicken ban, sorry. Leave that in and send the rest of it back to the Public Safety Committee.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Would that be a vote on the first motion
That's what I was going to say.
and then take a secondary motion?
So I'm sorry, are we making changes to the ordinance now? And what are we doing?
The first motion that was presented would have to be acted upon first before any secondary motion is acted upon.
So the first motion is asking us to accept this animal nuisance ordinance
As it is presented.
as it is presented. And if we said yes to that, that would include the ban on the chickens. And then we would go back to the second motion. I'm just clarifying.
Right.
You're doing pretty well so
Okay,
far.
and then we would go back to the second motion that's on the table here. That would
If
put
you-
that back
No,
into order.
If you said yes to the first one,
Yes, that's done. Okay,
So as a point of order, wouldn't a motion to refer back to the committee be a procedural motion that would take precedence? Or if it were a motion to table, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
What's being asked, to see if I can clarify by what I have written here. The first motion is to adopt 487-2 as presented. Then we have another motion to amend that ordinance.
But by necessity, well, that's
No.
not by necessity.
While you're thinking, Counselor Winchesty's motion is not to amend it. It's to send it back to committee to amend it.
Right.
So as Councilman Bolger said, that's a procedural motion.
Well, as she stated here, is to amend this ordinance to include chickens exclusively. So that part stays in.
So if we were to, okay, would we vote on just excluding chickens at this time from the city, and that would be a vote? And then we would, no, we would vote to send it back to the committee?
Yes, I think the only germane motion is the motion to table it or to procedurally send this as a whole back to the committee. If that passed, then the secondary motion of approving overall would be void, because at that point, you've got a majority that says to send it back for the procedural review and potential amendment.
Can you repeat that one? Can you say that one again?
So, as we said, there's two motions, as Councilman Bolger said. The motion made by Councilor Winchesky is more in the nature of a procedural motion to send it back to the committee. So since that is the most recent motion, the initial motion was just to adopt this ordinance as it's been presented. The second motion to potentially table it, send it back to the committee, procedural in nature, would, if that passes, and if you vote on that first, which is what you should do, then if that passes, then the draft ordinance that's here goes back to committee again. It does not get adopted here tonight. The second vote, or the initial motion, would not take place because it's no longer before you. A majority of you would have voted to send it back to committee, if that makes sense.
And if I may, if we're sending it back to committee, I think what Councilor Hammersley is saying, the whole thing goes back. You know, you were suggesting just take a look at this particular language, and what he's suggesting is the whole thing goes back, and
Okay.
and you're providing them some guidance and direction in terms of things that you're interested in addressing, but it opens to me, it opens the whole thing up, I think, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're screwed in pretty tightly here with two motions in front of us. How do we unscrew this to get?
I'd say that be careful with my words. I will go ahead and say that we should proceed with Councilor Winchesky's motion to send the potential adoption, basically to table the potential adoption of this motion until a later date, and to send the language of the amendment back to the committee for review and potential.
Postpone.
Sure.
So which one are we voting on first?
That one.
That one.
Councilor Winchesky.
Okay.
That one.
Do we have further discussion on that?
Let me see if I can put it into words so that we can. Would this require a first presentation again?
Yes, it will.
That would be a first presentation next meeting of the,
Ostensibly, if the committee changed it within that next time,
Okay.
if it just comes back as it is now, no changes are made, then I don't think you have to do another first presentation. This is now actually, we already did two first presentations essentially, so with that tweak. So we're now at the third reading of the ordinance, or the proposed ordinance. And so if it went back and changes were made, then yes, a first reading I think would be appropriate in that instance, because you're then presenting new language to the public. They have an opportunity to review and to respond and to attend both meetings and to make their placement on that issue.
so this motion by Councilor Winchesky is to postpone the vote on 487-2, this amendment to the animal nuisance ordinance, and return the discussion to the discussion to public safety, public utilities for further deliberation and future presentation. Are we attaching a date to this? Because I don't know if public safety will meet in time to have it prepared for us in 2 weeks. So just postpone it.
My only quibble with that would be that you are transferring the discussion back, but you're transferring the text of the ordinance back to you. So it's not just the discussion, it's the actual text of the ordinance that's going back.
Turn the discussion and ordinance proposal.
Did we have a second on that too?
We did.
Yeah. Okay.
To postpone this motion, returning the discussion, and ordinance proposal to public safety for further deliberation and future presentation. As clear as I can make it right now, Counselor.
I want to talk about chickens.
Floor is open.
Now, first of all, just a matter of clarity, if this ordinance had passed, then chickens would be banned in the city of Ludington, which was different than the public comment interpretation. I too am appreciative of all of the residents coming out and voicing their opinion one way or another. Overwhelmingly, the last 2 weeks, there has been a groundswell of support for chickens in the city. So when it goes back to committee, I would like the committee to explore whether we can have chickens within the city. Just so you know that up until 4 weeks ago, I was against chickens in the city. It was just a knee-jerk reaction. But after listening to the public comment and being invited and actually going to see a resident here in Ludington that has 4 hens in their backyard, and they had these 4 hens for 9 months before any of the neighbors actually realized it. The public comment was basically that the hens or chickens are environmentally friendly. They're a good source of healthful and expensive food. And what was key to me is they are less disruptive than dogs and cats. Other cities and towns larger than Ludington have found a way to support hens in the city. So I would like the committee to explore this as a separate ordinance. But if this ordinance had come up the way it was, only because it banned chickens, I would have voted against it, even though I support everything else in it, like the feeding and encouraging deer in the city. I was also struck last meeting, and it took me a while to understand it, that we were challenged to manage the verbs and not the nouns. And at first I didn't know what that meant, but manage the behavior. So don't particularly ban a noun like a chicken, but ban what they would infringe upon your freedom. So loud noising, running free, biting you, barking at all hours of the night. So again, that's my request back in committee. See what we can do. There's a lot of support here. There was only one person last time that again said no to chickens, but everyone else that has come before this council has said yes, chickens in the city. I think we can do it. Thank you.
Hold your applause, please. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, I'll go slowly for my benefit, not yours. We have before us a motion by Counselor Winchesky, seconded by Counselor Johnson to postpone this motion and return the discussion and ordinance proposal to the Public Utilities Committee for further deliberation and future presentation if necessary. Does that satisfy you, Counselor?
Did you get, yeah.
Yes.
Is the language okay for text?
We've had discussion aplenty. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll for me, please?
Counselor Winchesky,
Yes.
Counselor Stibbits,
Yes.
Counselor Bolger,
Yes.
Counselor Kane,
Aye.
Counselor May,
No.
Counselor Truzano,
No.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
5 ayes, 2 noes.
This motion is carried.
If I may, I think Counselor Kane brought it up. One of the recommendations I would have, because these are 2 separate issues now at this point, my recommendation, and I would talk to Counselor Terzano about this, is to pull the chicken ordinance and to have public safety not consider it and to have BNL consider it as an issue, because that was the original committee that had considered chickens in the past. And because it ends up being a zoning issue that our code enforcement department looks at, it might be better suited in BNL. So if that's okay with council, and Councilor May, if you're okay with pulling the chickens out of that ordinance,
Please.
then I'll work with Councilor Terzano and code enforcement to get working on some of that.
That's a terrible suggestion. No, that sounds
perfect.
That motion is carried. Quick procedural. We have the original motion in front of us. That is now null.
Correct.
Thank you. Anything else for us, Councilor
I
May?
think, Your Honor, I think that'll do it wonderfully.
Move on to building and license and long-range planning. Councilor Terzano.
Yeah, I want to put a motion on for chickens. Yes. I have no action items. I do want to report tomorrow, the zoning committee of the planning commission is having its first meeting with the consultants on the United Development Ordinance. They've done their diagnostic review of our zoning ordinance. So we're going to meet tomorrow at 9:00 for probably several hours. People are welcome to come. And not surprisingly, as they went through the various plans in the zoning ordinance and everything, it is very clear, as we've all suspected, that there's a lot of inconsistencies and contradictions throughout the process, because that's just the nature of, doing ordinance. You just add something here, take something away there, and then before you know it, you got some conflict. So that process is well underway, and I welcome people if I know it's during the workday, but should be an interesting discussion. And that's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cemetery, Parks, and Recreation. Councilor Stibbits.
We have nothing to report and no action items.
Marijuana Ad Hoc Committee. Back to Councilor Terzano.
Marijuana Ad Hoc Committee meets tomorrow afternoon. We should be finalizing both the zoning ordinance and the police power ordinance. 3:00.
3:00.
But we're also going to be taking up the application process, as well as making a decision on whether or not we're going to develop a scoring rubric for people that want to do that, to help us differentiate between different operators.
There you go. I'll appreciate that. We'll open the floor now for communication from city officials.
I have just one. The West Michigan Shoreline Regional Development Commission held a board meeting on September 19th, 2022. This commission consists of 21 board members from the 5 counties of Lake, Mason, Muskegon, Newaygo, and Oceana. At this meeting, the annual work program and the budget for the fiscal year 2023 were reviewed. Several items of interest for Ludington are the hazard mitigation plans for Mason County will be done in 2023. This allows us to apply for FEMA funds should we have an emergency in our area. Work is being done to certify the PM River, PM Lake, and Lake Michigan as, quote, a drowned river mouth, which would open up a pot of resources for our lakefront and river area. Also, the commission may come into possession of some trail counters, which could be loaned out to organizations to gather trail data usage. It would be nice to know how many people use Cartier Park and how many people use the Merino Walkway too. The next meeting is November 28th in Newaygo County.
Thank you. Anything else from council? City manager report?
I have a few items to update you all on. First one, City Council, I gave you an update dealing with the issue of a high zinc result that we got from our sludge hauler. We did some additional investigation. Thankfully, we are no longer getting that kind of influent into the plant. Now we're just kind of going back up. We're checking, if you remember the design of the new wastewater treatment plant, it's kind of got all those different cells or ponds that are much smaller. The 2 northernmost ones are where we hold is kind of the sludge storage. One of those was the only one that we tested. So we're hoping to get the second test from the other pond which would show that we had a period of time where we were receiving zinc, and then it kind of ended. And that's what we're hoping, which would mean that we could then transport the other pond, frankly, and utilize that as a farm discharge versus the northern one, which had the zinc. We'd have to dispose of it a different way. So we're working on that. Chris Cassette is doing a great job, losing some sleep. So if you see him, say thank you for the work he does. He takes a lot of this stuff very personally, and he should, because of how important it is. But he also needs to understand that work is work. So the chief search, the police chief search is well underway. The search committee did a good job of narrowing down candidates. We are now down to our final two that I gave to all of you today. So hopefully on November 10th, we will have a public event for all of those of you in attendance at 5 o'clock here in this room to have your chance to meet and encounter the two candidates. And for public notification, that's Mark Myers, who's the former chief of police for Dearborn Heights, and then Ryan Myers, who's a sergeant with the Big Rapids Police Department. So we will have that on the 10th, and then hopefully within a couple of weeks after that, we have some additional decisions that are brought forward to council for your knowledge. Virginia Dieter has started as the city treasurer. She's doing a great job so far. She's been on for 4 days, and then she had a pre-planned cruise. So she is on a cruise right now, unfortunately for all of us that are still stuck in this room. She will be back on the 24th. I have asked her to attend that meeting so that she can introduce herself to all of you, and in particular finance committee, so that you guys get a chance to meet her directly too. The budget, we have our draft. I'll call it our draft rough budget, pretty close to finalized. We'll work over the next week to kind of narrow things up and to review it. Finance committee will probably have it before you all at the next meeting, just for kind of initial review of things, but still a lot of tweaking left to do there. The bargaining sessions with the Service Employees International Union, or our public safety or public works employees, water and wastewater, finished up on Friday. We have a pretty good tentative agreement on a number of items. That'll as well make its way to City Council over the next couple of months. A couple last minute items. High water grants. The state is putting out a ton of money into high water grants, dealing with the issues that we had over the last few years, that we will be looking to apply for, as well as the federal government is. So we're actually going to have a conversation with West Michigan Shoreline, as well as with some of our engineering firms, about what we can apply for. And then just as an update on the short-term rental legislation before the state Senate, it died on the floor. They did not take it up for a vote. They didn't have the votes at the state Senate. So hopefully that continues. But as we get closer to post-election and the lame duck session enters, don't be surprised if you see a barrage of emails from me regarding that issue, because it will continue to rear its unfortunate head from folks that frankly aren't here having a conversation with us at any point in time, even though we continue to invite them on a regular basis. So that is all I have, unless there are comments, questions, concerns.
Can you repeat the time on November 10th to meet
Yes.
the potential candidates?
Yep. So we will have a public meet and greet here in this room at 5 p.m. on November 10th, which is, November 10th.
Thank you.
Yep.
Quick question, any of these high water monies, can any of them be used retroactively for damages that have been?
No,
Future.
no, for future planning only. And part of the issue and part of the frustration I think that communities are going to have with these dollars is they all, especially from the federal government under the ILJA, which is the infrastructure law, they are putting the emphasis on doing natural remedies and natural habitat building and those sorts of things. The Eagle is not going to allow us to build a sandbar out in front of the water plant. Hard infrastructure is really the best bet for our water plant. It will protect it long term, but that's not hard infrastructure like a seawall, additional riprap. But the federal government doesn't like that. It's not as nature friendly as, say, a reef out there. But we can't build that in Lake Michigan. So there are some things that internally within the United States they don't look at as positively or as a good option because of the way that they build their legislation and their rules. So we will work on it, but yeah, we will continue to apply.
Thank you. I have a quick request of council. I have been asked to speak in front of the Michigan Municipal League's board Thursday morning. Topic of conversation for my speaking partner, Mayor Nathan Box of Holland and I is the success or lack of success of the community exchange that took place this summer. I have my opinions, but I would like, if council has anything they would like to have brought forward at that presentation, please get it to me in writing before the end of the day on Wednesday, if you could. I'd appreciate it. Incorporate that into my presentation. And we'll just leave it at that. Move on to public comment, and I request anyone wishing to address council, please step to the lectern and proceed after stating your name and address. Please speak directly into the microphone and address all comments to this chair. Each speaker will be allotted 2 minutes. If time limit expires during any comment, I ask that the speaker respectfully finish their sentence and yield the floor. Any speaker wishing to present materials to council directly, I ask that those materials be left at the lectern below the microphone on the shelf. With that, the floor is open.
Jerry Grams, Ludington, Michigan. If I understand the motion that was passed correctly, it was for a deer call within the city limits. And I'd remind council that the high school forest is not in the city limits. I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but there are some, and I know before you actually sign a contract, I hope this would be considered. Motion sensing ultrasonic devices and motion sensing sprinklers work extremely well and keeping deer out of your yard. Of course, that requires individuals to be responsible for their own property, and maybe they'd rather the city be responsible for it. I have personal experience with those. They work 100%. The other thing, in full disclosure, I have been seeking counsel to consider the strength of my arguments. Needless to say, getting somebody in Ludington to do that is not proven to be easy. So I'm currently corresponding with a law firm in Grand Rapids, seeking their advice as to the advisability of taking other actions to stop this call. Thank you.
Okay, Tom Anderson, 905 North St. Catherine. And my comment is going to be just kind of my little summary. I don't come to these all the time. Some of you have made comments you like to see people here. I really wasn't in favor of the deal call. I do think we have quite a few more deer right now than we have. We might go through this winter. We might have a lot of snow, and some of the very deer that I see every day up in my end of town may end up not being here in the spring. They may not find feed. We might have heavy snow. They might not have enough to support them, and they'll die off. I hate to see them suffer. I really don't want to see them shot either. But I did see that you guys are dealing with a situation that's got many opinions on it, differing opinions, and people don't agree on it all. You hashed it out. You talked about it. I do have to say that you can take the deer feed, that candy away, but if you don't take, in your respect, the other candy away, like the hostas and the plants that they like to eat, that will also draw them in. I don't plant hostas anymore because they love them. I haven't had the same experience as this gentleman has had. I've put the little deer off on a wire, little thing sits on a wire, put it down on the ground to keep them from eating plants. And I watched the deer stand there and look right at it and reach over it and eat plants. So you can spend a lot of money for gizmo deer things to try and keep them out, and it doesn't keep them out. They have a mind of their own. They are actually a very intelligent wild animal. And, but I want to commend you on the fact that you did a lot of good things tonight. You had a lot of interaction, and on a couple things, Kathy, in your case, you weren't sure about this one. You wanted to send it back to committee to make sure maybe that you tweaked it to get it right. Looks like chickens lost, deer won. Yeah, the other way. Deer lost, chickens won.
Chuck Sabansky, 201.5 4th Street, Ludington, Michigan. On the deer calling, I think you're doing a good job. I'm a deer hunter, been for 68 years. I have to abide by the DNR rules when I deer hunt. Abide by the deer and by the rules. I can't bait in the woods. I can't bait in the woods. Does that mean I can bait in Ludington because I live here? Can I shoot a deer because I live in Ludington? I don't have to worry about the DNR? I don't understand. I really don't understand. We have rules. You can't bait. You get fined by the DNR, a pretty healthy fine. I hear people baiting. I don't understand. We have rules. We should go by the rules. Thank you.
Cheryl Whitehead, 112 North Emily. Sorry, I've got a sore throat tonight. I'm a little confused. Do we have chickens or do we don't have chickens? The chickens went back for more discussion. Is that it? Okay. I don't think that I understand why chickens ever got thrown out anyway. Not tonight, I don't mean, but at all. I think that people are afraid that they're going to have roosters, which, you know, even chickens don't want roosters. A lot of people think you have to have a rooster to have chickens or to have eggs, and you don't. So maybe some of this needs to be some public information as well. And as far as the deer accidents with cars, maybe we ought to cull cell phones. Thank you.
There's no more public comment. I'll close the floor and move on to miscellaneous business. Does council have anything further to add before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
I'd like to just share some good news to end the meeting with, these long controversial meetings. The Household Hazardous Waste Day that was held the third Saturday of August, 268 cars from 279 households came through on that collection day. They raised $4,164 in donations from that day. We collected about 650 gallons of used motor oil, which a local farmer will use for heating fuel for half a year. Over 19,700 pounds of materials was collected and kept out of our environment. Of this total, chemicals amounted to 5,114 pounds, oil-based paints, 4,700 pounds, and toxic products or cleaners, 3,900 pounds. So congratulations to everyone who contributed. Thanks.
Your Honor, I have one matter.
Please.
For his many years of service to the city, I'd like to thank and commend my friend here, Acting Chief Steve Wietrzykowski, WIETRZYKOWSKI. And I just want him to know that at least one of his counselors can not only pronounce, but I can spell his name.
Well, you can also see his name tag
No,
where you're sitting.
I honestly can spell it.
So unfair.
That means
That
means no speeding tickets for 20 years, don't it, Gary?
I have one, just point of clarification. Chickens are alive in the city, and the Building and License Committee will take up the issue of whether or not chickens will be allowed in the city at our next meeting in November, which is the second Tuesday in November. So Thursday, sorry. So.
I do have one last thing. I apologize. This upcoming weekend is the girls golf state finals. Ludington has made it. They are ranked right now 11th in the state. Please cheer them on as they go play down at East Lansing at Forest Acres. It is an interesting test. They should have a good time, and at least one of them, Emma McKinley, has a very good shot to place top 5 at least within the state of Michigan. So good luck to the girls golf team this year.
Well, while we're spinning the infield here, anybody else got something they want to bring forward?
I think you did a good job tonight with only 2 issues on the agenda.
Done in just under 2 hours. Well, this concludes tonight's agenda for this meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Counselor May, second by Counselor Kane to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for your attendance as always and your participation. This meeting is adjourned. I typed an awful lot of complaints and ideas.
Thank you.